Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, the first of a series of 5 sessions this week celebrating National Payroll Week 2023. My name's Calvin, and I will be one of your hosts and presenters today, and I am joined by Duncan, who will be co-hosting with me in today's session. A little bit about what we'll be doing for National Payroll Week before we get into it. So as I mentioned, there are going to be 5 sessions, and a little bit special this week. If you attend 3 out of those 5 sessions, you will earn yourself a nice payroll processing proficiency badge, as you can see a little screenshot there in the bottom left-hand corner. So more details about that when we get to the end of the session. But speaking of the session, it's all about starters and leavers today. Now, before we dive into the main content, I do want to run through just a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who are new to our webinars, we do use GoToWebinar's webcast feature, and you'll see a couple of icons on the right-hand side. The first one is a microphone. It's in red and it's crossed out. Now, this can't be changed. It is saying that your microphone is muted. So if you have one as part of either your headphones or headset, if you're using one of those, or built into the laptop or computer you're using, this is muted automatically, and it just means any conversations you may be having with either colleagues if you're still in the office or family if you're still working from home will not be heard by anyone in the session at all. So you don't need to sit there in silence. The next icon down is a question mark in a little speech bubble. Now, this is where you can ask the team a question, and we do have a team of experts standing by in the background ready to answer those questions. So when you click this, it will expand the page if it isn't already expanded. Then you can type in your question in the white box and hit the blue send button. Your question will then appear in the grey area as a larger speech bubble with the answer appearing underneath. Now, we do use the reply to all feature as well, so do keep an eye out for other questions and answers coming through. Unfortunately, though, as it is a webcast, there is no ability to download the Q&A at the end of the session. So what we do advise is when we get to that point, you can copy and paste the Q&A into a Word document, and that will allow you to save it for later. The next icon below this that looks like a piece of paper with a little folded corner there. When you click on this, you will be able to download a copy of the handout today, which is a copy of the presentation. Now, there are 2 versions available to you. We have a nice digital version, which has all the colors and the clickable links, as well as a black and white version, which is a little less heavy on your ink. So if you wish to print them, there is a printable version to download as well. And lastly, if you would like to make the presentation full screen, click on those 4 arrows at the bottom, and that will bring the presentation full screen on your monitor. Just be careful not to hit that exit button. We don't want you to leave too soon. However, if you do hit that by accident, don't worry, you can just simply rejoin. Okay, so that is the housekeeping done and dusted. So let's have a quick look at what we'll be covering in today's session. So I'm going to be handing over very shortly to Duncan, who's going to take us through new starters. So the information you'll need, employee wizard, quick employee options, submit your starter details in your FPS, and any common questions. It'll then be back to myself, and then you'll be able to go through processing leavers, so final payments, leaver wizard and P45, as well as submitting those leaver details in your FPS. We'll then be covering off some further support as well as having some time at the end for questions. Now, we have the session scheduled for about 45 minutes, but the presentation itself shouldn't take longer than 30 minutes, so we do have plenty of time because it's a very busy session to try and get as many questions answered as possible. With it being so busy, though, I do have to stress that you may have a little short delay in getting questions answered, with there being quite a lot of you today. We do apologize on that, but we will be working tirelessly to get through all the questions as quickly as we can. So I appreciate your patience with that one. Okay, so without further ado, it's now time to hand over to Duncan, who's going to take us through new starters. So it's over to you, Duncan.
Thank you very much, Calvin, and welcome to the webinar, everyone. It's great to see so many people joining us. So first half of this webinar is about new starters joining your employment for the first time. We're going to share some hints and tips and show you the process of setting them up in Sage 50 Payroll. So first thing we're going to cover is the information you'll need about your new starters, which I've grouped into 3 categories. So first of all, you will need accurate personal details for your employee. That includes their full name, so no abbreviations or shortened versions of their name. It needs to be the full name as per official documentation. You'll need 2 address lines and a postcode as a minimum, the employee's date of birth, their gender, and if available, their national insurance number. You're then going to need to know how you're going to pay them. So payment details would include which pay elements you're looking to assign to them, rates of pay, whether that's a fixed salary or maybe an hourly payment, and also a note of their contracted hours, as this is something that will be submitted in each of your FPS submissions. And we're going to share a tip about copying some of the settings from existing records when we go into the demo. And you also need a starter form from your employee. And most commonly, it'll be a P45 that they got from their previous employer. If they don't have one of those, it'll be a starter checklist, which has replaced the old P46 form that some of you will be familiar with. And then a lot less common, there are P46 pen and P46 expat forms, which are used for payrolls that are paying out a pension to an employee and for employees seconded to work in the UK. So the ones we're going to focus on today are the ones that are most common. That's the P45 and the starter checklist. So speaking of which, let's have a look at those starter forms. So on the left-hand side is your P45. There are 3 parts to a P45. You will need part 2 in order to set up the employee record. You will also take part 3 from your employee. But if they have given you part 1 or 1A, you would give that back to your new starter because that is their own copy to keep. And then the starter checklist, if you don't have a P45, is available to download from the gov.uk website. It's a really useful form for capturing information. So I would recommend that you keep spare copies of this form anyway, even for employees with a P45, as you'll be able to get information about things like student loan repayments, which aren't necessarily available on a P45 itself. So assuming you have one of these forms, you are then ready to set up your employee record in Sage 50 Payroll, and this is what we're going to go through in the demo. There are 2 ways you can do this. You can work step by step through the employee wizard. So it's a bit more detail gets entered if you do it this way, but it could take you a little bit longer. Or you could use the quick employee option. And as the name suggests, it's a little bit quicker. You enter all of the key details in one place, and then you can go ahead and save that new record. Now, regardless of which method you use, you will need to enter the details of the starter form. So that's exactly what we're going to do in the demo. So let me just bring the slides down. And first thing I want to do is to show you some examples of a P45 and the starter checklist. So starting with a P45, I have here a PDF version, and I've just got parts 2 and 3. And it is part 2 that will contain all the information for the new employer to set up the employment record. So this will often have the employee's national insurance number. It'll have their name, the date they left their previous employer. And it's worth checking this date to make sure it does fall in the current tax year, because if it is a previous tax year that the P45 relates to, you will need to handle it slightly differently, which we'll come on to as part of the common questions. It tells you if student loan deductions are currently in force, but it doesn't tell you the plan type. That's where a starter checklist can be useful. The tax code that was used, whether that was on a week 1, month 1 basis. And if it is a cumulative code, it shows you the previous pay and tax, which will be entered into the new employment record, so that the tax can be calculated moving forward on that cumulative basis. So that's part 2. You'll also be given part 3 that you retain. So you used to send this off to your tax office back in the day, but that hasn't happened for about 10 years now since RTI came in. So you just keep hold of this, and the information from part 3 will be automatically included in your FPS submission. So that's your P45. Quick look at the nearly called it a P46, the starter checklist, which replaced the P46. So there's a link to this in the handout, and an employee can either fill it in online by clicking the Start Now button, or perhaps a bit more convenient is to download the PDF, the starter checklist for employees. So this is a great way for you to capture your employees' personal details. You can also get the circumstances that apply to your employee, which will help you to choose the relevant starter statement, A, B, or C. So they answer a series of questions to come to one of these answers. And then here on the third page, there's detail on student loans. So it tells them what the different plan types are, so that you're deducting the correct percentages and amounts if they are continuing a student loan. So top tip from me would be to have starter checklists available for all new starters, even if they have a P45, and then you've got two sources of information and you should have everything you need to set up the employee record. Right, so now let's take a look at the process of creating a record. So these tasks are found from the employee option here in the bottom left corner. So you can choose between the employee wizard, which, as I mentioned, allows you to record the details of a new starter, and you would work step by step, filling in the information on each screen, and then you've got the back and next buttons to take you through that full process. And anything you see here with a star next to it is mandatory, but things like address lines are also pretty important as well. So Employee Wizard is one way to enter the information. The other way to set them up is the Quick Employee option, which is just underneath. And as you can see with this one, it opens up a single screen where you can enter all of the key information. Again, the mandatory information is indicated with a star. And then once you've saved the employee record, you can always go back in and add further details as required. Now, when it comes to paying your employee, assigning pay elements, perhaps departments and other settings, you might find it useful to copy the settings from an existing employee when you're setting up a new starter. And you can actually do just that by selecting an existing employee in your payroll before opening the employee wizard or the quick employee option. And this is also really useful if someone has left your employment and then they've come back to work for you at a later date, because if they're a leaver, it also allows you to copy their personal details. So that saves you a little bit of time and also helps you to keep consistent payroll records for employees that are doing similar roles. So for example, I have an employee who's going to be doing the same role as my new starter. So I've started by selecting them in the list. And if I went into the employee wizard, you'll see that does open up some other options. So I could choose an option to create an employee record based on an existing employee. Or if it's the same employee that I'm re-employing, we can choose this third option, and it will also copy their personal details. So that's really handy to do. You can use it with Employee Wizard and also with the Quick Employee option. So clicking on Quick Employee, it's detected that I've got someone selected. Do I want to base this new employee on the existing record? I'm going to go ahead and click Yes. And you will see some of the fields have been filled in for us. So the pay elements assigned match the employee I'd selected, the department matches that employee, the pay frequency, etc. will also match. So what you then need to do is to go ahead and start entering the basic details. So I am going to put some information in here. I'm not very imaginative when it comes to employee names and addresses, but you get the idea. I'm just going to put some text in each of these boxes. You can put some contact details, and if you enter the email address and you're using online services for your online payslips and P60s, that will become the employee's login for their online payslips once you've uploaded them for the first time. So fill in as much information as you can at this point. As I say, the stuff with a star next to it is the mandatory information, so I'll pop a date of birth in. You need to confirm that you've conducted right to work checks. So I'm going to go ahead and click Yes. And if there is a specific document that you've checked, and that's a great way of making sure you've got the correct full name, date of birth, etc., you can also record the details of that document by clicking this Details option and choosing the document type from the drop-down. So that's then stored in your employment record in the payroll. And we're just going to go ahead and enter start dates. They actually started on the 1st of the month. We could put in bank details if we want to record them. And then here in the top right-hand corner, this is where we enter the starter form information. So with a P45, you'll get most of the information here from that form itself. So date left previous employment, total pay and tax code at leaving date. It won't contain the starting declaration, so you'll need to ask your employee the question or get them to fill in the starter checklist to determine which starting declaration applies to them. And then that information will be used to set up the employee record. But this particular employee doesn't have a P45, so I'm using a starter checklist, and in Sage 50 Payroll, we've still gone old school, we still call it a P46. Technically it's a starter checklist now, and with a starter checklist, it's just a case of choosing the relevant starting declaration, which will then automatically assign the relevant tax code. So in this case, statement B puts them on 1257L on a week 1, month 1 basis. So I'll go ahead and enter the national insurance number. If for some reason you don't have it, don't make it up, just tick the box not known. We will choose the national insurance category. So if it's an employee who's over 20, it's generally standard rate contributions. If they're above state pension age, they go on to category C. But we're going to go with standard rate for this one. And on the starter form, they were not repaying a student or postgraduate loan, so we've left both of those options at no. So it has copied over the department. A quick note about pensions, and we will have a separate webinar on pensions later this week, but if you have our pensions module, you'll need to let the module assign the pension scheme when you do a pension assessment. So when you're setting up a new employee, don't assign the scheme at this point, because you want to correctly generate all the information for your pension provider. So we're going to leave that blank. We could type in a job title if we want, and then we can enter some payment details, which for this particular employee is a gross yearly salary, which will be converted to monthly automatically. And you can see we already have an overtime payment assigned because that's been copied from that existing record that we selected. So I've got enough basic details entered. I'm just going to click Save and Clear, which will clear down that form. And then if I do have any further employees, I'll be able to repeat those steps. So there is a quick note here to tell me that contracted hours must be entered within the employee record. So for any additional information, once you've created the new starter, you can then access the employee record in the usual way. In this case, I'm heading to the Employment tab. I'm going to the salary details. I'm going to enter this employee's contracted hours, which in this case is 40 hours per week. So that is the record set up. That is ready to be used the first time that I pay that employee. And a quick tip, when you do pay them for the first time, if they haven't worked for the full period, you may need to manually adjust their pay. So if they're not paid hourly, if they're paid a fixed salary, you might need to do a pro rata calculation for that first period. But then moving forward, they would get that full month salary, which will be the default value stored in their record. So that is setting up a new starter and dealing with the starter forms. You can read more about this by following the link on this screen. When it comes to notifying HMRC and registering that new employment, this is all done automatically when you submit the first FPS for that employee. So starter details are included, including the start date, the starter declaration that was selected, the employee's address, and student loan indicator, for example, is also included. And when you send the FPS, you will see for any starter, there will be a starter date in the important information screen. So keep hold of part 3 of the P45 if you have it. You don't need to send that anywhere because it will all be automatically sent in your next FPS. Now, before we move on to levers, I'm just going to cover off 3 common questions around new starters. So the first one of which is, what if the leaving date on the P45 is in a previous tax year? So I did say to check that leaving date, make sure it is the current tax year. If it's previous tax year, the key difference here is you should not enter any previous pay or tax values because they don't belong in the current tax year. And there's actually guidance on what exactly to do on the gov.uk website following the link from here. So it depends on the employee's start date. If it's after the 22nd of May in the current tax year, you would just put them on the emergency tax code. If it's before that date, you would use the tax code on the P45, but you would disregard the previous pay and tax. And if it's an even older tax year, so it's not the previous tax year, it's the one before that or older, basically just use a starter form instead, a starter checklist, and get them to fill that in. Second question, what if an employee does not have a P45 or a starter checklist? So sometimes this information doesn't arrive at the payroll department. And to set up the employee record, if you need to pay them, choose P46 as a starter form. But when it comes to starting declaration, there is an option to choose none. So I'll put them on a 0T tax code for the time being, which will hopefully prompt them to bring one of those forms in. If not, you should get a tax coding notice from HMRC at some point in the future. So that's how to deal with it if you haven't got any of those forms, but ideally you'll have one or the other. And the last of these common questions, what if you get the P45 or starter checklist after the employee's first FPS? So this depends on if you've received a new tax code from HMRC. So if you've had a tax coding notice, you disregard the P45 or starter checklist, just go off the information on the tax coding notice, which often will have previous pay and tax. If not, if you haven't had anything through from HMRC, you can use the starter form wizard to enter the details. So within the employee record, quickly show you, there is an option here for starter form. So if I hadn't entered a starter form to begin with and they've brought it in subsequently, we can click on starter form and that will then allow you to enter the relevant information through this wizard. So that is it from me. That is your new starters. And we're going to bring Calvin back at this point and he's going to run through processing levers. So back over to you, Calvin.
Thank you so much, Duncan. Okay, so let's bring my screen on there for you and let's have a look at processing levers in Sage 50 Payroll. So the first thing to mention, and we're going to dive into a demo here, is that final pay run. So with the final pay run, you'll see in enter payments, and like I said, we'll show you this in a demo. There's a little tick box at the bottom to say select this checkbox if your employee is leaving, and this is their final payment. Now this tick box does a couple of things which we've listed here on this particular slide. Now the first thing is if you have a director, which is where it's really important to tick this box, it will recalculate the director's national insurance amount. So remembering directors use annual thresholds for national insurance. So if you've got them on a pro rata method, for example, it will recalculate the national insurance to make sure that it's calculated correct up until this final payment. So it is necessary for directors specifically. The next thing it does is it will pay cash in rounding amounts, so it always rounds up. It also will pay out any outstanding holiday funds. So if you have a holiday fund set up in Sage 50 Payroll, it will pay out any outstanding holiday funds. If you've got any tax refunds withheld due to trade disputes, for example, a bit of a hot topic this year with the strikes that are happening. So if there are any tax refunds that are withheld due to those, then when you tick this box, it will pay those tax refunds as well. And lastly, it calculates any other outstanding items. Now, what I will say is if none of these apply to your employee at all, when you tick this box, you'll not see anything different happen. So it is worth mentioning that if none of these actually apply to you, then when you tick that box, you won't see anything different. It will just be pay as normal and carry on with the process itself. So what is the order that you will be doing things in when it comes to doing a lever or processing a lever? So the first thing you'll need to do is update your records. So once you've entered that final pay, tick that box as we've just shown, you'll need to carry on with your normal process and then update your records. Once you've updated your records, you can then go into the lever wizard, which again, we'll show you in the demo. And once you're through the lever wizard, this is where you can then print your P45. We have introduced an email version as well, which again, I am going to show you. It's in a slightly different place though, but you can print your P45 through the lever wizard. Once you've then completed that, it's time to send your full payment submission or your FBS, and that will send off those leaver details to HMRC. Speaking of which, there are a couple of things you will need to do once you have processed that leaver, which includes notifying your pension provider. So as I mentioned, the leaver details are included in that FPS. So you've updated records, you've gone through the leaver wizard, you've then submitted your FPS, and then you will find that your leaver details are included in that FPS. So you can see there, we've got a bit of a screenshot there. So nothing too different to what you normally see. You've just got a date in that leaver column there. And it's also worth mentioning that you also must notify your pension provider. Now, in terms of how you go about doing this, it will be completely down to which pension provider you use. So we must advise that you contact your pension provider directly to find out how they need to be notified. It may just be a case that you give them a ring and they go, okay, brilliant, you've notified us, but it can vary from provider to provider. So for guidance on that, you'll need to contact your pension provider itself. Okay, so I promised you a little demo. So what we'll do now, let's jump into Sage 50 Payroll. As you can see, we are here. Let's go ahead and we're going to process a leaver. Now I'm going to process a director as a leaver. Okay, so just to save a bit of time, we'll go through the full leaver process for this one director, because everything else will remain as in normal, as you would for a normal employee, sorry, apart from that tick box, because that's the one thing I want to show you for the director itself. So we have our director highlighted at the top here. So remember, the first thing we need to do is enter their final pay. So we're going to jump into enter payments. And here you'll see their tick box. Let me just untick that from when I was doing a quick practice run through before we start. So select this tick box if your employee is leaving and this is their final pay. So I'm going to go ahead and tick that. You'll just get a quick message to say you need to update your records. So we'll be doing that in a moment. So update your records. Then process your leaver details, i.e. go through the leaver wizard. So it's just going through those stages that we ran through, and then click OK. Now, this particular message is because this is a director who is on the pro rata basis, just saying that when we've ticked that box, the national insurance has been recalculated. So if I just move this over there, you'll see currently there is an amount of £114.24 for this director. However, when I click OK, you'll see that now has changed to a refund. So based on the annual thresholds, prorating that for the amount of months this director has been with us as a director, this director actually is owed some national insurance back. So it can vary depending on how much you paid your director, how long they've been employed as a director in that tax year as well. So these figures are very, very rough, as it were. Yours might be completely different. Some directors might owe money, whereas this particular one actually has a refund due. Once you've done that, you can just click Save and Next, and that's the final pay entered. Now, remember when you tick this box, if nothing actually happens at all, it's simply because those criteria that were on the slides didn't apply to that particular employee. So don't worry if nothing changes. We're going to click Close, and that is the final pay entered. It's now time to run through the leaver wizard. So to do this, we're going to jump into the employee record. I do this by right-clicking and then going to Open Employee. Some may double-click. It's completely up to yourself on that one. Then we're going to go across to Employment. And you'll see here we have a leaver button. So let's go ahead and click the leaver button. We know this because we've ticked the box. However, I've skipped a step, which I'll pretend to you that I've done it deliberately to show you what can happen when you don't do a final step. But in all honesty, got ahead of myself. Okay, so let's close out of there. What did we forget to do? We forgot to update records. So let's do that now. So remember, the order that you go in is final pay, update records, then leaver wizard. So if you get a message like I just did, it's because you haven't updated records yet. So click yes. Hopefully you all know the update records process. Click OK. Now we can go in and select the leaver wizard. And when I do it this time, we get the lever wizard appear. So no error messages are popping up because we now updated our records. So that's just highlighting a little bit the importance of remembering to do that. Not like I did where I completely forgot. So let's click next. And here you can enter the leaving date. So for the demonstration purposes, we're going to leave it at the 30th of September, which is our payday. But it is completely when they have left the business. So it's depending on your circumstances on that one. If the employee has deceased, you can select this tick box. I know that's not a very nice subject to talk about, but it is there if you do need to do that. And then in the drop down is where you'll find your P45s and all the various different layouts. I'm going to show you the plain paper for e-submissions. So if I click on that and click preview, this is the most common one that gets printed. You'll see why. There you go. So you don't need any stationery for this. You can print it as you see on screen there. So that is the P45 and we've previewed it, and you can just hit print in the top left and that will print this P45 for you to then hand or post to your leaver. Once you've done that, you can click finish and you'll see there that the leave date has been entered. Now at this point, just a quick one because we do get asked about this. So if it was done by in error, so you've accidentally marked this employee as a leaver, the way to fix this, highlight the leave date, press delete, and that's it. So if there's no leave date in there, that employee goes back to active, and then of course you can go ahead and run the lever wizard again. So you see there, the lever wizard now available once more. So we'll quickly just jump through that again. There you go. You'll see when there's a leave date entered, the lever wizard is grayed out. So as I mentioned, if you need to change the date, you can change it manually, or if it was done in error, just delete that date. Once you've done that, hit the save button, and we'll close. It's now time to submit our FPS. So we'll go to full payment submission. Don't worry about the big red warning. This is because we're in a classroom environment. You won't get that. Don't worry about that error. You won't get it either. It seems there is an issue with mine. We'll have to refer to the screenshot for that particular one. But you'll see as I try to get that one resolved, you'll see that the lever, so if I bring back our screenshot here, you'll have a lever date in this particular section of the full payment submission. So this would be the screen that would normally appear as you would see, and you would just have a leave date. So in our example, we would have employee 1, their national insurance, and then a leave date of the 30th of September, which is what we've entered. For those of you who wish to email the P45, we have added this in the latest version of Sage 50 Payroll. So if we click on reports at the very top, then go to employee on the left-hand side, everything's in alphabetical order, so we need to scroll down to the P's, and you'll see we have all of our P45. So there's the one that we showed you in the demo through the lever wizard, that plain paper for use with e-submissions. We also have this one underneath, which has the same title, but you can see there we have MS Outlook. And if you use something like Google Mail or Yahoo Mail, which is classed as an SMTP, you'll be able to use this one. So what we can do is highlight this, hit the email button, wait for this to load a bit. We should get that. There we go. Report has successfully output to email. Payroll is still there, by the way. It's just brought the slides back up as it's changed windows. And if I bring up my emails, let's make sure it's on the right window. You'll see there in drafts, we have our email address here. So we can just pop in the employee's email and send it. If it's already got it in the record, then it will have that populated and you can just hit send. So it goes into your drafts with a PDF attached. So that is the P45 emailed. And when it comes to processing a lever, that's pretty much it. So the only things after that, as I mentioned, is to make sure you notify your pension provider and of course, pay your employee their final amount. But you've processed everything in Sage 50 Payroll and produced a P45. One thing to note when it comes to the P45, and this is a HMRC rule, once you have issued that P45, so if you've either emailed it or posted it and it's gone to that employee, you cannot reissue another one. Okay, so if it's gone and there was an error, you can notify them that there was an error, but they will need to speak to HMRC directly to receive a different one. Once it's been issued, you cannot reissue another one, okay? As I mentioned, that's HMRC's rules. So that brings us to the end. So as I mentioned, we did overrun about 35 minutes, but we've got 10 minutes left to run through any remaining questions. So please do keep them coming whilst the team tirelessly answer them. We have had quite a few come through, so apologies if there has been a delay in getting those answered, but they are working through them, I can see. Further support options we have, the very first thing to mention is the Help Centre, so sage.co.uk/help, where you can search through our knowledge base. So if you have a specific question about starters or leavers that might have come to you once the session's ended, I know that can be quite common in my case, where you always think of a question too late, you can head on over to our Help Centre and type that question in the search bar there and have a look through our knowledge base articles. You can find support guides, so things like processing your payroll, such as setting up new employees or marking an employee as a leaver. There are access to webinars as well, so you can find our regular weekly webinars. As I mentioned, it's a special week this week where we've got 5, but we do run them every week as well, so do check out those. You can find videos and, of course, the get in touch options as well. One thing to show you actually, whilst I have you, I'm just going to jump into our 50 Payroll here. So we're talking about the Help Center. So in Sage 50 Payroll now, if I just remove that date, remember, I can go back to the lever wizard. If you press F1 on your keyboard, which I will do now, you can find access to help directly from within the program. It looks like our internet's running a little slow today, but you will have access directly to all of the relevant guides that are in this space. In fact, if I cancel out of that one, you've got these green help buttons as well, which you can click. Again, you'll see the same window appears. Seemingly, I'm having a few technical difficulties, which will certainly get resolved after the session has ended. But you can access our help directly from within the program as well by clicking F1 or clicking on those help icons. And maybe I recommend you trying it whilst you're on the session, whilst we're getting those questions answered. Press F1 whilst you're in your payroll program, see what happens, and have a look at it yourself and just have an explore. The next thing to call out for you for further support is Sage University, which is a free to register. You can go to sageu.com and you can access a full library of e-learnings, Sage certifications, and of course, bite-sized learning as well. So again, as I mentioned, it's free to register and there's some really good courses on here. So if you'd like to expand your Sage Payroll learning beyond this week, then head on over to Sage University. And it's a really good resource as well if you're training someone to either replace yourself or, of course, help you out with the payroll. It's good to direct them to Sage University. So we did mention that we are running 5 webinars this week for National Payroll Week. And as I mentioned, there is a special badge to be had. And all you need to do to achieve that badge is to attend 3 out of our 5 live webinars this week. So we have 2 today, so we've got another one this afternoon. We'll have one tomorrow, one on Thursday, culminating on Friday with the big Sage Payroll quiz. And the questions in those quiz are going to be all about the 4 sessions that we're covering prior. So a bit of fun as well as educational. So if you want to get involved on a Friday morning, please feel free to join us for that. If you're downloading the handout, there is a link at this point where you can click and you can view the schedule for these 5 sessions and register for any that you wish to have. And then if you have attended 3 out of our 5, you will receive one of our badges, that particular badge, which is Processing Proficiency for National Payroll Week 2023. And they will be sent from next week. So do keep an eye out for those as well. And you can share that on your social media or put it on your email signatures, however you wish to have it. Some may even print it off and have it displayed on a desk, who knows. So that wraps it up at this point. I'm going to jump on mute for the remaining 5 minutes, just to help the guys out who've been tirelessly answering those questions whilst I've been talking through all of that further support for you. So I'm going to help those guys out as well. I'll be back shortly once the questions have either been all answered or we've run out of time as well. So I'll be saying our final goodbyes. If you are leaving us at this point, it's been an absolute pleasure to see so many of you on today's session. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Apologies for the slight technical difficulties I had, so I couldn't show you that FPS, but we'll certainly get that resolved. And of course, we hope to see you in another one of these sessions, or hopefully another 2, or even all 5 this week. It would be really pleasing to see so many turn up to all of those sessions coming up as well. When you do leave the session, you will be directed to a short feedback survey, and it does mean the world to both myself and Duncan if you can spend just a small amount of time filling that in as well, as we love to hear your feedback. We can't make changes. We can't try new things either as well without that feedback from you guys. So it gives us plenty of ideas, plenty of things to think about, including the quiz that's happening on Friday. That is also, we ran that last year and we got some amazing feedback, which is why we're doing it again. So we do listen, we do read it, and we do try to make things better and change things based on what you tell us. So I do appreciate that. Is probably something you've heard quite a lot, but it does mean a lot to both of us. So thank you in advance. So I'm going to jump on mute now and help the guys out with a question, and I'll be back shortly to say our final goodbye. Okay, everyone, we are slowly coming to the end of the questions. I can see. Apologies if anyone had any questions that were unanswered today. As I mentioned, it is a very, very busy session, so I appreciate we did do our absolute best to get them answered, but I know that some may have gone astray. It does look like we have got the majority of them, and we have stuck around for a little longer than was scheduled to make sure as many were answered as possible. So I do thank you for your patience with this as well, and I thank you for your patience in having those questions answered as well, because there was slight delays. As I mentioned, we were having quite a few, so we try to get them all answered as quickly as possible. I'm sure you saw them all coming through on the right hand side there. So with that being said, we are going to wrap things up whilst the remaining questions get answered. Remember, we do have the other sessions that are coming through that are happening this week. So we've got 2 o'clock this afternoon, where we'll be running through sickness and maternity. We then have pensions and pension module happening tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And then we also have Get Your Payroll Done with Duncan on Thursday at 2 o'clock as well, followed by the big payroll quiz on Friday, which I do hope you can attend, as it is quite an enjoyable session for both us and yourselves, where we can get you guys involved. So we asking some questions, get some answers, and we show a little demos as well. So it is definitely worth attending. And don't forget, if you attend 3 out of 5, it can be any 3 as well. It doesn't have to be 3 specific ones. Any 3 sessions out of the 5 this week, you will be achieving that badge, which of course will be sent from next week. Okay, so that is it from me. Hopefully we will see you this afternoon, potentially, as well as the remaining sessions this week. Again, thank you so much for attending. I do hope you've enjoyed it and you're all looking after yourselves out there and staying safe. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.